This is part 2 to the pricing chapter. So we started off talking about how consumers perceive prices and some of the facets of consumer pricing psychology. Next, we're going to discuss the steps in setting a pricing policy and setting the price. So in short, there are 6 steps in setting a pricing policy. As you may have become accustomed to, the first step in just about everything is going to be setting an objective, and that's the same case here. The first step is setting the pricing objective. One thing to think about before this, though, is when does a company need to go about this process? When a firm has a new product, when it introduces maybe a regular product into a new distribution channel or a new geographic area, or perhaps in a business-to-business scenario when it enters bids on a new contract. These are common scenarios when a firm has to decide or make a new pricing policy. The firm should decide where to position its product on quality and price. So the 6 steps then are: first, select the pricing objective, determine the demand at different price points perhaps, estimate the cost, conduct an analysis of competitor costs, prices, and offerings, select a pricing method, and that's the actual price strategy point, and then select the final dollar price. These are some common pricing objectives. It's important to have a clear objective, because the clearer a firm's objective is, the easier it is to set the price. And these are the 5 major pricing objectives. They're survival, maximum current profit, maximum market share, maximum market skimming, and product quality leadership. Briefly, in survival, companies pursue survival as their major objective if they have a lot of overcapacity or supply, if there's a lot of intense competition, or rapidly changing consumer wants. It really means that if the company doesn't set a price where they can sell a lot, they may not survive. So as long as the price will cover the variable costs and at least some of the fixed costs, the company can stay in business. In maximum current profit, many companies try to set a price that will give them the highest possible profit. They estimate demand and cost that are associated with different price points, and they choose the price that they believe, based on this analysis, will produce the maximum profit, cash flow, and rate of return on investment. In maximum market share, companies are not as concerned with profit, but focus more on the share of the total market. They believe typically that higher sales volume will lead to lower unit costs, and this comes sometimes from the experience curve or discounts on increased manufacturing and purchase quantities, and that this will lead to higher long-run profits. So in this case, they may set a low price and assume that the market is price sensitive. We'll talk about that a little more when we discuss elasticity of demand. But the premise there is that the lowest price will achieve the highest demand. In maximum market skimming, companies may be unveiling a new technology. This is a common kind of condition for this. And they may set a high price to skim the market, meaning that maybe the innovators, if that group or segment of customers is large enough, they will be able to achieve a really high profit margin. Apple, when they first released the iPad or iPhone, the prices were set very high because they wanted to reap the benefits of the customers who had to have the product right away and knew that they would pay for it. Then over time, they may start to drop their price. And then finally, product quality leadership is when a company would aim to be the product quality leader. A lot of brands strive to be this affordable luxury brand or product where they have high levels of at least perceived quality or status, with a price that's high enough to be profitable, but still low enough where a large number of consumers can afford to buy it. So let's take a look at Tesla for a minute. You may want to take a second and review Tesla's website just to see the variety of vehicles that they offer. And try to determine if you can figure out what pricing objective Tesla has. And I will tell you that just like most car brands, these different models, right, have very different price points. So when you get a minute, take a look at it and see what you think. You might be surprised that there is actually a Tesla you'd probably be able to afford, or at least when you graduate and have a full-time job. Okay, here's where things might get a little bit sticky. We're going to do a little bit of math, but it's very simple math. The second step in setting pricing is determining demand. Knowing, or at least being able to accurately, to some degree, estimate what demand may be for your product will help you consider what the appropriate price point is. And one facet of this is price sensitivity. Price sensitivity refers to how demand may change, right, based on how price changes or alternative prices. Some other things that help determine demand could be conducting surveys, asking consumers their likelihood to buy given certain scenarios, maybe conducting price experiments and running some more complex statistical analysis. So we're going to focus on elasticity of demand here. You should have seen these before. These graphs are examples of an inelastic and inelastic demand curve. And this refers to how sensitive consumers are as a conglomerate to changes, either changes in price or alternative price points. I don't want to always say changes because it's possible that this is a pretest of price and maybe there hasn't actually been a real price yet, but the firm is testing different price points. So what this shows is that at each price point, there's a different level of demand. And these different levels of demand will have a different impact on a company's marketing objectives. So in the demand curves here, you see what is a typical relationship, that there's an inverse relationship between price and demand, meaning that as price goes up, typically demand goes down. That's what we mean by an inverse relationship. The higher the price goes, the further down, decreasing, demand will go. So consider these two curves here. This elastic demand here is when the line, the curve, is more horizontal. So what this shows is that when the price is $15, the quantity of demanded, right, is 50 units of whatever, cell phone cases, laptops, iPads. Well, an iPad would be more expensive. iPad case, let's go with that. But at a price of $10, we see that the quantity demanded increases pretty significantly. So that's a very elastic response to the price either decrease or increase, okay? In an inelastic demand curve, we have the same price points, yet we see little change in the quantity demand. Now, it's still an inverse relationship, right? As price goes from $15 to $10, we see demand go from 100 to 105, so it's still an inverse relationship. But it's not as significant of a change. So this one is inelastic, right? Less sensitivity to price changes. And this one is very elastic, quite a significant change in demand based on the different price point, right? And they're the same prices. So that should be a little bit of a review for you in elasticity. Let's do a really quick example to calculate the elasticity of demand, or what we call the elasticity coefficient. Let's pretend that you've started making custom cell phone cases and deciding to sell them on campus. And you have set your price at $35 for these custom cell phone cases. In the first week, you sell 40 of them. In the next week, you lower your price to $30 because you believe that if you lower the price, you may sell a lot more. But in the second week, you sell 44 cases. So you did sell more. Let's calculate the elasticity of demand. Your formula is here. All we need is the percent change in demand, or QD, and the percent change in price, P. And then we just need to divide the percent change in price by the percent change in quantity demand. So here's what your formula will look like. Okay, you take the new price, or the new quantity, 44, subtract the old quantity of 40, divide it by the old quantity, that gives you the percent change. Okay, a 0.10 is the same as 10%. You probably didn't need a calculator for this one. 4 divided by 40 is 10%. Now on the bottom, we had lowered our price, so the new price is $30. The old price was $35, and divided by the old price gives us the percent change in the price. So it's a negative because we lowered the price. Negative, these are backwards, negative 0.14, so a reduction of about 14%. And if you do the math on this, the elasticity coefficient here is negative 0.70. The negative doesn't really matter, it just is important to know which one of these was negative. And you know that because you reduced the price, this one was negative. Okay, so because it's below a 1.0, that's our threshold for elastic versus inelastic, and this is below 1.0, we would say that it was a fairly inelastic response. So when you lowered the price $5, you only sold 4 more cases. This is fairly inelastic. So if you're deciding what to do in week 3, should you lower your price or should you bring it back up to 35? In this case, I would suggest that you bring it back up to 35 because you didn't have a lot of change in the quantity of demand that was equivalent to your change in price. So you didn't sell a lot more. So consumers are fairly insensitive to that price reduction. So there's really no reason to lower your price. Now let's do a second example. So that was a price decrease. This one is a price increase. So same scenario, you sold them for $35 and sold 40. Well, the next week, let's instead raise the price to $40. And you find that in the second week, then, at $40, you sell 18 cases. Let's calculate the elasticity of demand. So here's your formula. Let's plug in our numbers here. Okay. Now in this case, right, we had a price increase, so this becomes positive. Quantity of demand decrease, so it's logical this is now negative. And when you work these two out, you get a negative 3.85, which is way above 1.0. You can forget about the negative sign. That's not really relevant right now. So I'm doing this to really point out that elasticity can be different depending on whether you lower the price or raise the price. So when you lowered the price, people didn't really race out to buy the cases. On the other hand, when you raise the price, people really stopped buying them. So they were very sensitive to the price increase, but fairly insensitive to the price decrease. So in this case, you definitely would not want to raise your price because you had a very significant and disproportionate drop off from the price. The raise in price at 14% led to a 55% decrease in the number that you sold. So I want to make sure that that's clear. Elasticity of demand, your coefficient can be different depending on whether you lower the price or raise the price. So some things that can affect price sensitivity are a product that's distinctive. If there are not a lot of substitutes, consumers are less likely to respond negatively to price increases. If buyers have trouble comparing one alternative to the next, or maybe if the price is just so low to begin with, think about like a pack of gum. Are you really going to notice if that pack of gum goes from $1.19 to $1.29? It's such a small part of your total income. You're probably not going to notice or care that much. So in that case, you're probably not going to be very sensitive to the price. Also, if someone else is paying for it, you may not care as much about the price. If you travel for work, do you really try to get the cheapest travel arrangements if you know that you're going to expense it to your company? Probably not. So you may be less price sensitive in that case. So here's just a couple of things that may reduce price sensitivity. The third step then in the pricing process is estimating your costs. It should seem pretty logical that you cannot adequately price a product or service without first knowing what it costs to produce that product or service. So we say that demand sets a ceiling on the price, right? We have to know what demand is at certain price points, and if you go too high where demand drops off, you got to bring the price back down. But costs are what set the price floor, meaning that the company must make sure that it charges a price that at least somewhat exceeds its costs. Cost of producing, cost of distributing, cost of selling, cost of advertising, that should include some kind of fair return on its effort and risk. There are two main forms of costs. There are fixed costs and variable costs. The fixed costs are those things that don't change from unit to unit. It doesn't matter how many cell phone cases you make. It doesn't matter how many cell phone cases you sell. But let's say you are renting a little workshop in an office building to help you make these. You're going to have to pay that rent from month to month no matter what. So they're the same thing as an overhead cost. Then variable costs are the things that vary directly with the level of production or how many units of the cell phone cases or widgets or whatever you make. So each of those cases has a unit cost. Now, managers often will look at its costs with varying levels of production. So depending on whether you're producing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 units of something, they may be able to achieve cost per unit efficiencies. Sometimes it's discounts on raw materials. So if you buy it in a bulk of 1,000 and then buy it in a bulk of 2,000, you'll see a per unit cost discount. It's the same concept as why some people like to shop at Costco and Sam's Club. They have to buy large quantities of things, but perhaps, or in a lot of cases, the per unit or per ounce cost of those products is lower. Okay. Now, sometimes, though, in manufacturing, they will find that there's a certain point where they achieve these cost efficiencies, but then it will start to swing back up, perhaps because they reach their maximum level of production, and anything after that, they're having to have storage, or they're having to spend time fixing their machines and what have you. So it doesn't always go down indefinitely. There's a point at which that long run average cost can come back up. So companies need to know, or they try to figure out, what is their optimum level of production in order to have the lowest per unit cost. So let's do a really quick break-even analysis using our cell phone case example. Let's say you decide now to rent a kiosk at the mall, and they're charging you $300 a month to rent this space. That's a fixed cost. It doesn't change no matter what, no matter how many units you sell. And you also have calculated that your average material cost to make your cell phone cases is about $5 each. You may have some that cost a little more and some that cost a little less, depending on the colors and the design. But on average, $5 is what you have calculated. So going back to a $35 price point, what's your break-even point if you're selling them at $35? Meaning, how many units do you have to sell in order to start making profit? And this is what your equation should look like. You have fixed costs on the top, $300, because that's what you have to cover, okay? You're selling at $35, so this is price minus the variable cost of $5. And what this actually calculates is your contribution margin per unit. So you're selling the cases at $35, and if they cost $5 each to make, then you have about a $30 contribution margin going to first pay off this fixed cost up here. So if you do the math there, you can see that you need to sell 10 units or 10 cell phone cases to break even, and then after that you'll be earning, back to here, $30 per sale. And that's the end of part 2.